Hello adventurers, I'm going to be reviewing the installation of the GlobeScout XTOP Top Rack to the BMW R1200GS liquid-cooled Adventure. As a point of starting out, I'm pretty sure that this top rack is only compatible with the GS Adventure. It's not compatible with the standard GS. And we're just going to take a brief moment to review all the materials you're going to need for the installation. So let's get that out of the way quickly, because you want to make sure you've got all the right materials before you start work on any sort of job with something that's a piece of transportation. So starting from the top right, we've got ourselves some 6mm washers. We've got 4 of them. We've got these 22mm long bolts that are going to accept a 5mm Allen key. We've got these 36mm bolts that are also going to accept that 5mm Allen key. We've got another set of 6mm washers. We got some nylon lock nuts. We've got these spacer sleeves that you're going to need to use with the 36mm bolts. We've got 2 of these brackets that GlobeScout have designed for mounting the top rack to. And of course, we got the coup de grace, the top rack itself. Additionally, you're going to need to have a 10mm wrench and a 5mm Allen key in order to complete this install. So here we are, we've got our 1200GS, and the first step you're going to need to take is taking the brackets and mounting them to the existing top case rack that you should already have on the GS Adventure. I found that it was significantly easier to get these brackets installed with both of the seats removed. I don't really know is the front seat's important, but the back seat certainly gets you the ability to reach in a little bit more easily than you might otherwise be able to. So I've already installed the left side, and what I would just call out is you see this cutout. It's on one side of the bracket. The other side of the bracket has a no cutout on it. You want to make sure that that cutout is going to be on the bottom side when you're installing the bracket. That's because that cutout is going to be accommodating this piece of the existing top rack already. So the installation is pretty easy. You just slip your bracket onto the top rack, push it until it's good in place, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's little spacers. They should be contacting the existing top rack bars once you've positioned both of the brackets in the correct position. So once you have both of the brackets installed to the top rack, you can start worrying about getting those things bolted into place so that they won't come off. So with your brackets installed, you're going to need to use the longer 36mm bolts. You're going to place one of those 36mm bolts through a sleeve like so. You're going to take one of the 6mm washers and place that on the end once all of this assembly is through the bracket, and then finally you're going to secure it in place using one of the nylon lock nuts on the end of the bolt. I'm going to go ahead and install one of these on the brackets, and we will take a look at it once. So here you can see I've got one of the bolts and nuts assemblies installed. We've got the bolt naked on top of the bracket. It passes through the bracket and through the sleeve that you need to install aligned with the hole that's in the bracket, and it'll come out the bottom of the bracket. And then if you look down here, hold on a sec, I'll get a flashlight out and we can get this thing properly illuminated. We can see both the lock nut and the washer on the bottom side of the bracket. And based on the diagrams that Paul had sent me, you want to use the smaller 6mm washers for mounting the brackets, and you're going to save the larger washers for installing the rack onto the brackets. So here you can see all of the bolts have been mounted in each of the holes in the brackets. We've got each of the spacers are flush against the pre-existing GS top case rack. The brackets, I've tightened down all the bolts onto the brackets using that combo of the 5mm Allen key in the top and using the 10mm wrench on the bottom to get the lock nut held in place. The other thing that I would call out at this point is that this nut and this nut right up here, closest to the seat on your bike, really the most incredibly difficult part of this entire job, and they're not that hard, but you got to kind of snake your fingers in there and hold them in place. You don't have a lot of room to work with in that tight space. That's why I've taken my seat off, but if you leave your seat in place, you can probably still get it done. Alright, with your brackets in place, you can now install the top rack. And, so let me kick everything around. If you look at your top rack, you'll see that the holes that are drilled in the top rack, where you can mount it to the brackets, the holes are a little oblong, and that gives you some play. That's a tolerance that you can use to work with. And I highly suggest that you give yourself some room to work with while you're getting this top rack installed, because it's going to need to be on there without stressing any of the members unnecessarily just due to its installation. In order to accomplish that, my recommendation is to take one of these bolts, install it, not even finger tight. You don't want it flush to the side of the rack. And then get to the opposite corner, install the bolt there, and you'll have it stable and supported, but you'll still have a lot of play in the rack. You see how much I can move the rack around? It's going to come in handy when I put the additional 2 bolts in. I'm going to go ahead and put those in, and then tighten them down with the Allen key wrench, and then we'll have our top rack installed. Alrighty, when your bike starts to look like this, you're done. I've taken all the bolts, and I've tightened them down with the 5mm Allen key wrench. I installed all 4 bolts loose prior to tightening them down with the Allen key wrench. So there's still a little bit of play. I got the rack to sit in a nice neutral position, and then I tightened down all 4 of the bolts with that Allen key, and our rack install is done. So that means now we can go ahead and take our top rack and install it. Installation is pretty simple. There's some holes in the bottom of the rack, bottom of your case. They're going to fit over these pegs on the rack. Then you slide the case forward. And once you're finally got the case in place and pushed over these bolts on the top of the rack, you're going to use the lock to lock the top case against the rack, and then nobody's going to be able to remove it. Alright, so now we got our top case in place. You can see the bottom mounting plate of the top case slid over the bolts I was pointing out earlier. Got our hasp moved up to the point where it's flush to the hook that's on the back of the rack. So we're going to take our hasp, unlock it, hook it over the hook on the rack, then close it back into place, and our top case is secure. Go ahead and take your key, lock that, and now your top case isn't going anywhere. So that is how to put the top case onto your R1200GS Adventure. Hope you found this video walkthrough helpful, and you get your own top case installed without any problems.